Okay, we spoke about the brush heads and just a few of the things you can do with them. And for any brush, the brush head, imagine that as being the thing you're drawing with, be it a paintbrush, a pencil, a stick of charcoal, whatever. But there's another one, the texture or the grain, that is emulating the surface that you're drawing on. Now for this, I'm using the sugar paper file and I've changed the background color to kind of a gray color. I can change it to whatever color I want. Let's make it a little bit darker and make my color a little bit lighter so things show up clearly. I'm in my textures 2 folder and I've got DC crumpled paper chosen. I will swipe to the left and I will duplicate it. I will come to my duplicate, I'll tap on again to go into the brush studio. And for this time, I want to choose grain. And you can see it's a crumpled brown paper texture. And if I draw with this, there you go. Instant crumpled paper texture. Now the brush shape is a very simple shape. That's because I don't want the brush shape doing any work. I want the effect to come from the grain. Now this is a very easy way to build up all different kinds of textures. And when you get the grain and the shape playing with each other in different ways, you have a massive amount of flexibility. Now let me show you just a few controls, not a full list, that's on my Procreate Solid Foundations course, but just a few. For example, the depth slider. If I play around with that, you can see how deep I want the effect to be. I can also affect how bright or dark the overall effect is. Be careful with this. You may be looking at this thinking, right, well, if I draw with that now, I'm going to get a darker color. No, you're not. Let's take a look at this. That's what we originally had. This is what we're going to have with the brightness slider set low. Looks a bit odd, doesn't it? You wouldn't expect that to happen. Well, look, let me show you. What you've got with any grain file or shape file is a black and white image. And so take a look at this image. I'll zoom in on it. It's got some darker bits and it's got a few quite light bits. The lighter bits will put down more paint than the darker bits. Let me show you this. Let's take up the brightness a little bit. And this is what we've got. And at the moment it works because I'm using a light color. And so it kind of works the way you would expect it to work. The lighter bits of that texture we're using are putting down lighter bits because yellow is a light color. Well, look, let's try this. Let's come to our background color and I'm going to make it quite a bit lighter and I'm going to use a much darker color. Let's use deeper red. Now I'm going to draw. When you take a look at this, this almost looks like the image in reverse. That is because wherever I have light bits on that texture, it puts down more paint. In this case, it's putting down more dark red paint. So that's something to remember and hopefully won't end up confusing you when you come to paint. Don't think of what you're looking at as a piece of paper. It is just a whole series of greys, and the lighter the greys, the more paint gets put down, and the darker the greys, the less paint. You can affect it by using things like the brightness slider or the contrast slider. Let's give you an area so that you can look at this more clearly. Right, so brightness controls, well, how much paint this can splat down. Contrast, well, very low contrast. It's a very even looking brush. If I increase the contrast, I'm getting a much more contrasty effect. Let's take a look at this compared to what we had before. And yeah, you can see that. If I come back to it, if I come to where it says edit, well, one thing I can do is 2-finger tap directly on that image and it inverts it. So the lights become dark and the darks become light. Let's give that a try. And you are getting a different effect there. It looks more like that crumpled bit of paper. Okay, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to come back to about this brush and I'm going to reset my brush so it goes back to the state it was when we first found it. There's my grain. And here's the nice thing with the Drippy Cat Art Studio. If you come to edit and you come to import, now the source library, that's all the textures that come with Procreate. But if you come to import file, go up to my Drippy Cat Art Studio and come down to where it says Seamless Textures. There's 113 of these in here, covering a huge range of different surfaces. There's Paper Crumpled 01, that's the one we were using. What about if we use, say, Paper Grit Mottled? Try that. And immediately you've got a completely different brush. So with the Studio, you've got a whole load of brush shapes and you've got a whole load of seamless textures. So that means you've got a potential for a whole load of different brushes just by learning a few things. Now, I want to show you something. Let's come back to this brush and I'm going to reset it again so I come back to my crumpled paper effect. This is a seamless texture. Now what that means is if you're drawing and for whatever reason you were to wander off the right side of the texture and come back in on the left side of the texture, you wouldn't see the join. Seamless means that you don't get a whole load of little tiles with hard edges. Now you can try importing a non-seamless file by using auto repeat, which I'm just circling now. In some cases it does a good job and you don't see the joins. In other cases it looks a bit strange. I've found over the years that the best way to do a seamless texture is to do it yourself. So that's what I've done. There's over 100 of them waiting for you. Now there is just one thing I want to point out with seamless textures. It is a balancing act. Like, there's my texture. Now supposing I decide, well, I need that, but I need it a little bit smaller. Well, you've got the scale slider. And if I reduce that down in size, you can see, well, raised up, you get a very zoomed in effect. Bring it down, you get a very zoomed out effect. Now if I try that, yeah, you see that? That scale has now gone smaller. And so just by using that scale slider, you are going to be able to customize any brush you like that uses texture to suit the artwork that you're working on. That's going to give you a whole load of flexibility. But if I make the scale too small, let's try, say, 7%, and let's try drawing that now. Can you see something about this? If I zoom in a little bit. Compare that smaller scale with a larger scale. What's the problem? Well, the problem is you're starting to see a pattern with a smaller scale. That is because I've set the scale so small that all the different light and dark bits that make up the scale are starting to repeat themselves, and because the scale is small, they're getting very close together, so then a pattern becomes apparent. And that is part of the craft of making seamless textures. If you make the scale too small, you're going to see repeats like you're seeing. And you've got two choices there. You can either make the scale bigger, like I'm doing now, so that you don't see the repeats and they're not so obvious, or you make your seamless texture so boring that there's nothing there to repeat in the first place. That is the skill when you're making seamless textures. You want to make it look interesting, because the only thing that's never going to repeat is a completely blank texture. And I want the interesting texture of a crumpled piece of paper with all the hills and valleys. But if there's too many distinct, interesting shapes in my seamless texture, those are going to be the things that people are going to pick up on. So it's a balancing act. And from your side, when you're playing with the scale of your texture map, you want it big or small enough to suit your project. But the smaller you make it, the more you're risking getting the repeated texture. Also, if you make it really huge, like, well, okay, 63, let's try that. 3-finger swipe down to clear my layer. That's not a bad texture. I do quite like that. But it's getting so large that I may up starting to see the individual pixels that make up this texture file. But look, this is really easy. Look, I've got crumpled paper, my original. I've got crumpled paper 2, which I've played with, but let's come back to reset. And now if I come to grain, come to edit, come to import a file. There's, what was it, 113 of these different textures for you to play with, covering a huge different variety of different textures. Load one up. and you have a brand new brush. So you may want to save that with a new name. And once you've saved it with a new name, don't forget to come to About This Brush and create a new reset point, so that if ever you do have to reset this brush in the future, you're going to get the texture we've just loaded rather than the original paper layer. Okay, so this video about the seamless textures you have in the studio, plus what sliders to use with them, and the video about the brush heads, plus the really useful sliders to use when you're working with them. Just these two videos alone have increased your effectiveness as an artist by a huge amount, because now you can start customizing your brushes and you have plenty of resources here in the studio to do exactly that.